What if it takes a woman to hold a man at gunpoint for him to finally realize his true abuse of power? I'm Dre, and this is The Midnight Hour. Tonight we will be reading The 548 by John Cheever, published in the New Yorker in 1954. This story follows a businessman named Blake. That is his last name, and that is what we will know him by for the rest of the story. Blake is a very powerful and successful businessman. He probably is a CEO or a higher up leveled person at some beautiful company in New York City, no less. Now, the story starts off with Blake leaving his office on a very mundane type of day, rainy day, not much else is happening, but he takes sight of someone, a woman, who may or may not be following him. This is how the story starts off. We're not told exactly who she is yet, but he heads out of the lobby of his office toward the busy New York street, and he also notices her following him just a few steps behind him. He starts to get a little paranoid, a little worried, so he goes into different places, such as a cafe, a bar, and once he comes back out, she is still there. She's still following him through the rain, through the crowd. We're finally told the backstory. And the backstory is that he was in search of a secretary. And he found this woman named Miss Dent, who looked very unassuming, unthreatening, and just an all-around decent type of person that you would want to have as a secretary. So he hires her. They get to become friendly in some type of way with each other, even though Blake is married. And the friendliness is more so from her end of the bargain. But basically what ends up happening is he asks her out for drinks one night, and she says, if you really want to drink, I have whiskey back at my place. So the game is pretty much on at that point. Blake goes back with her to her place. They do what they do, and an hour later he gets up and gets dressed while she is visibly crying in bed. This does not faze him in the slightest. The story then says that his best approach to this situation is to have her fired the very next day. Basically him washing his hands of the whole situation. And that's what happens. Personnel comes and fires her during lunch. Blake takes the rest of the afternoon off, and that's how their relationship ends. Cut to 6 months later, which is today, present day in the story, and Blake is seeing her once more, following him. He's freaking out, rightfully. He decides he missed his express train home, so he's going to catch the second train, which is the 548. He boards the train, sits down, is certain that he's lost her, is looking out the window, letting himself relax a little bit. Guess who shows up right next to him and asks to have a seat right beside him? Miss Dent. Miss Dent takes that seat. She starts to speak with him a little bit and informs him not to make a sound. There's a pistol aimed right at his stomach in her purse. So at this point, the stakes are raised. And Blake does as he's told. She starts to inform him that it's been rough for her. It's been a few rough months. She hasn't been able to get out of bed these last couple weeks. She hasn't been anywhere, hasn't spoken to anyone but her landlady, and has written him a letter, has written Blake a letter, and she's going to have him read it. So he does just that. And while the letter is very evident of someone going through some mental trauma, he also is so apathetic toward the whole situation and toward firing her that he can't put the pieces together. Why is she now following me onto this train with a gun? They finally get off at one of the upcoming stops, a lonely, deserted stop. There's not much going on at all there. They walk to a nearby deserted field where Miss Dent yells at Blake to kneel down. He gets down in the dirt. She tells him, put your face in that dirt. He does just that. He begins crying. He begins to cry. He begins to show some emotion for the first time in this entire story. Before he knows it, he hears her footsteps walking away, slowly but surely. She has left him unharmed. And when he looks up from that dirt with his face covered in mud, he sees her on the platform, completely unfazed, has completely forgotten about him at this point. She has done what she set out to do, and that is how the story ends. We're now going to delve into 3 sections that pretty much sum up this story in a perfect way. And the first is really her, Miss Dent, being hired into Blake's office. And I quote, personnel had sent her up one afternoon. He was looking for a secretary. He saw a dark woman, in her 20s perhaps, who was slender and shy. Her dress was simple. Her figure was not much. One of her stockings was crooked, but her voice was soft, and he had been willing to try her out. After she had been working for him a few days, she told him that she had been in the hospital for 8 months, and that it had been hard after this for her to find work, and she wanted to thank him for giving her a chance. Her hair was dark. Her eyes were dark. She left with him a pleasant impression of darkness. As he got to know her better, he felt that she was oversensitive and, as a consequence, lonely. Once, when she was speaking to him of what she imagined his life to be, full of friendships, money, and a large and loving family, he had thought he recognized a peculiar feeling of deprivation. She seemed to imagine the lives of the rest of the world to be more brilliant than they were. Once, she had put a rose on his desk, and he had dropped it into the wastebasket. I don't like roses, he told her. So this first part really shows that Blake is cold, he is calculating, and he is emotionless. Okay, while Miss Dent is fragile, vulnerable, and even a bit kind. This dichotomy is a perfect recipe for a disaster when placed into the wrong hands, such as Blake's, because Blake is the type of person, he's the type of guy who probably loves to display power moves. He probably sits in the most strategic chair in the restaurant. He probably always one-ups someone when they're sharing a story. That kind of person. That's the kind of person Blake comes off to me as. And when he finally senses a weaker person in the room, he instantly pounces. And that to me is the weakest type of person that there is. Let's read part number 2. Now, the second quote is Blake and Miss Dent on the train, and Blake really thinking about how he can get away. Quote, the train continued its halting progress up the bank of the river, and Blake tried to force himself to make some plans for escape. But the immediate threat to his life made this difficult, and instead of planning sensibly, He thought of the many ways in which he could have avoided her in the first place. As soon as he had felt these regrets, he realized their futility. It was like regretting his lack of suspicion when she first mentioned her months in the hospital. It was like regretting his failure to have been warned by her shyness, her diffidence, and the handwriting that looked like the marks of a claw. There was no way now of rectifying his mistakes, and he felt, for perhaps the first time in his mature life, the full force of regret. End quote. So this really shows us that only in the most dire of situations does Blake ever feel some type of emotion, and this time it just so happens to be regret itself. This also points to the type of person Blake is even further, because who doesn't feel regret from time to time? You know, we as humans will make mistakes. Only those people who don't think they ever make a mistake don't feel regret. And that to me signals such a disconnect with your center, with yourself. Now, the third and final quote is the last paragraph of the story. And I really wanted to read this because it is the one time that we see Blake crying for his life, which we would not have thought we would see at the beginning of this story. And it says, "He fell forward in the filth. The coal skinned his face. He stretched out on the ground, weeping. 'Now I feel better,' she said. 'Now I can wash my hands of you. I can wash my hands of all this. Because you see, there is some kindness, some saneness in me that I can find again and use. I can wash my hands.' Then he heard her footsteps go away from him, over the rubble. He heard the clearer and more distant sound they made on the hard surface of the platform. He heard them diminish. He raised his head. He saw her climb the stairs of the wooden footbridge and cross it and go down to the other platform where her figure in the dim light looked small, common, and harmless. He raised himself out of the dust, warily at first, until he saw her, by her attitude, her looks, that she had forgotten him, that she had completed what she had wanted to do, and that he was safe. He got to his feet, picked up his hat from the ground where it had fallen, and walked home." And that is the ending of this story. And it really shows that Blake is a forgettable human being. He's a forgettable man. As soon as Miss Dent sees his weakness come out and just his inability to hold it together, when he really feels like he's at the edge of existence, really, then that is enough for her to wash her hands of the situation and leave him in the dirt where she pretty much found him in the first place, just not physically. And what I think is even more telling is that for the first time in Blake's life, he knows he's forgettable. His wife at home must know it deep down, and he, knowing that, has nothing else he can do but pick up his hat and walk home. And that's a sad and lonely ending to a sad story of a sad and lonely man. So that was this week's story. Like if you felt something, comment if you wrote something, and I will see you next time at the Midnight Hour.